Hello everyone, it's Nick. I am back with another ranking. Today we will be ranking the 2023 nominees for Best Picture from worst film to best film. Before we get into everything, do me a favor and like this video and subscribe to the channel so you stay up to date on all new upcoming content. So this year was really exciting. There was a lot of good movies this year. This crop of Best Picture nominees is a wide variety of films. So we'll get into the 10 Best Picture nominees and which film is the best. But first, let's go over the different tiers, how I will be ranking them. So, as you can see, we have four distinct tiers. There's the disliked tier, there's the generic tier, there's the good mid-level films tier, and there's the best picture worthy tier. Disliked tier, pretty self-explanatory. Generic, those are the films that feel by the book and less unique and special than the other films. The good mid-level films tier is just the crop of good films that don't exactly wow me, but they're still very good, very high quality films, so they get ranked slightly below the best tier, which is the best picture worthy tier. And that tier belongs to the films that I think would deserve the best picture Oscar. Those are the films that if they won best picture, I would not be upset. However, if any of the other films below that tier won best picture, I would slightly be upset. The one film in the disliked tier, and in my opinion, the worst film out of all the Best Picture nominees, is Elvis. There are a lot of problems with Elvis, but the main problem mainly comes down to the director, Baz Luhrmann. I actively dislike this film. I think this film is very flashy. Baz Luhrmann approaches the film with a more stylistic flash approach and less so from a storytelling perspective. I feel like the decisions he makes as a director don't lend itself to the story the way directors are supposed to. I think he makes personal directorial decisions that are frankly goofy and detract from the story. One common thing I've noticed in all of his films are the different overlays between different scenes, how he'll fade one scene on top of another and then leave it there. It doesn't really look photogenic. It's not really thematically sound. It's just off and it looks like sloppy filmmaking. He also does very corny things that films don't really do anymore. For example, there's the classic spitting newspaper shot in the film. Lastly, what I didn't like about the film is Tom Hanks' performance. I usually think Tom Hanks is a pretty good actor. I usually think he knocks it out of the park in terms of his performance, but I thought he was so goofy and unnatural in the film. I don't know if that's exactly how the person he was portraying was supposed to act and sound, but I didn't really care for it. I thought it was silly. I thought he was hamming it up. It really took me out of it. It really looked like Tom Hanks was thinking about his decisions before he made them. I didn't really care for Tom Hanks in Elvis. I thought he did a really bad job in terms of his performance. What I did like about the film is Austin Butler's performance. I thought he did a very good job playing Elvis. He doesn't look exactly like Elvis, but he looks like him enough that it didn't take you out of the story, and he did a really good job with his voice and the way Elvis speaks in terms of his mannerisms. I thought Austin Butler did a really good job. Other than that, I didn't really care for the film. If you like this film, you're entitled to that opinion, but I just want to let you know I didn't really care for it, and it's by far my least favorite film out of the Best Picture nominees. So with that being said, let's stop talking about Elvis because no one really cares. Let's move on to the next film on the list. And we are going to jump up a tier because Elvis is literally the only film out of the Best Picture nominees I actively dislike. I sort of like the rest of the films, but this one film is going to be the only film on the generic tier. It felt very by the book. It felt not as magical and special as the other films. The only film on the generic tier and the ninth place film in the Best Picture ranking is Top Gun Maverick. I love the approach of filmmaking that this film takes with the fighter jet scenes. I thought those were really dynamic and engaging. I thought they were far more engaging than even the original film. I thought the original film, when it was set in its time, was revolutionary, but I thought they really pushed the boundaries in terms of what you can shoot in Top Gun Maverick. And for that, I think it's a very special film. It was a crowd pleaser this year. It was probably the movie of the summer. A lot of people really like this film, and I also really like it too. It's a very warm, feel-good movie in a way. It's about Tom Cruise's Maverick. He comes back to Top Gun as a teacher. One of the pilots he has to teach is named Rooster, and he's Goose's son. So the whole film is basically about that dynamic and that resentment and hostility between Rooster and Maverick over the death of Goose. And it's a really interesting approach to a sequel to Top Gun. I really enjoy this film. I thought, like I said, I thought the fighter jet scenes were an improvement from the original film, but I thought what wasn't really an improvement from the original film was the story. I thought the first Top Gun had a more unique story. So the film kind of just feels like about a group of people that team up and learn from each other about personal lessons, about what it means to be a good person, and how to work with other people. And those themes kind of get painted onto the characters and story in a way that feels very generic, in my opinion, in terms of how Tom Cruise just goes through each class as a certain moral lesson. I feel like there are more creative ways to get to those themes rather than the story that was presented in Top Gun Maverick. But this film was a crowd pleaser. A lot of people like this film. I like it too, but I just think it's probably one of, if not the most generic film out of all the Best Picture nominees. But if you like this film, best of luck to you. We're now approaching the good mid-level films tier. This tier just has a whole bunch of good movies that I think are very good, but they didn't wow me enough to put on the top tier. So with that being said, let's move on to the next film. The 8th film in the Best Picture ranking is Woman Talking. Guess what Woman Talking is about? You're right, it's about women talking. It's about this group of women on this combine where they're isolated from pretty much the rest of society. It turns out all the men were arrested for domestic violence charges in some capacity. I'm not really sure about the details, but they will be back the next day, and the group of women that are there get together after being sexually assaulted and raped by these men countless times. They grouped together and decided that they have three options. They could do nothing, they could stay and fight, or they could leave. And the film is about the group of women talking about which decision they should make before the men return. It's a very powerful film, very dialogue-driven film. I think the most remarkable part about the film is the performances by the actors, especially Claire Foy and Jessie Buckley. I think they both do a phenomenal job as actors in this film. The film mainly takes place inside of a barn, and I think what's really engaging in terms of a filmmaking perspective is the shreds of light that cut through the barn door cracks and go through the scene. I think that creates a very dynamic lighting situation in the scene that's very enjoyable to watch. I think the best part of the film is halfway through where it's revealed exactly what time period the film takes place in, which I think was done intentionally to create a shock effect that is really effective. Why this film isn't higher on the list is, while it is a dialogue heavy film, I feel like the script was uneven. I think there are times in the film where they have forced laughter between the characters, and that's done so that the director can hit all the emotional beats that are necessary for the story. But I think the script tries to stretch and shorten those moments too abruptly. It's somewhat unsettling how the characters transition from one talking point to another. The seventh film in the Best Picture ranking is The Banshees of Inisherin. The Banshees of Inisherin is about these two Irishmen in 1920s Ireland. One of them randomly decides that they don't want to be the other one's friend anymore because he finds the other one dull and boring. So the film is about that one guy, Colin Farrell's character, trying to win over Brendan Gleeson's character and be friends with him again. But Brendan Gleeson insists that they do not be friends anymore, to the point where he cuts off his own fingers in retaliation. The film is obviously overtly satirical. I think the performances in the film, especially from Colin Farrell, are really good. I think Colin Farrell is fantastic in the film. Kerry Condon is also in the film, and she's very good in the film. She has a very good scene, and I think she's very warm. Her character is very likable. Barry Keoghan is also in the film, and he gives a very strong performance. The film is mainly about strong performances by these actors when they're put in awkward situations, and I enjoyed Martin McDonagh's directing style. That being said, there are major problems I have with The Banshees of Inisherin. The film tries to be too much that it's not. I think the film tries to be smarter than it really is. At the point where Brendan Gleeson's character cuts off his own hand, I'm surprised no one else just immediately thought Brendan Gleeson's character was psychotic. I mean, I don't know why at that point, Colin Farrell's character was still trying to win over Brendan Gleeson. I think it would have been better if he tried to torture Brendan Gleeson. I think that would probably make more sense. Obviously, that's where the film gets to at the very end, but I felt like they could have reached that point sooner and maybe had a different dynamic in the later half of the film. I guess the donkey choked on one of the fingers that was left outside. Okay, I think the finger itself is pretty small, and I find it hard that a donkey would choke on a finger. I think the finger would just go down the donkey's gullet, and I don't think something like that would probably happen. When that happened, I was kind of left confused because I didn't think something like that would even be remotely possible. By the end of the film, I was left wanting a little more, but not so much in a good way, so much as I wanted a little more clarity as to how I was supposed to feel. And I knew exactly what I was supposed to feel in a way. I knew I was supposed to feel somewhat unsettled and somewhat curious as to where it's going from here, and somewhat perplexed about the human nature between different people and how some people think about certain people in a certain way over time. In sixth place, Tar. So I think Tar is probably the most well-crafted film. Tar probably has the most artistic snob appeal, quote unquote. The film is about Tar, played by Cate Blanchett, who's this world-class composer there's this big concert in Berlin that she is supposed to conduct, and the film is very psychological. You're mainly dealing with Tar's psyche throughout the film. Whether or not you think Tar is a good person or not is tested at different points. You're wondering how Tar perceives her students and whether or not Tar is being 100% honest with the other characters and with herself in a way. Uh, Throughout the film, there are moments where you see Tar has prejudice towards other people, and Tar has a certain elitism towards her. And all this is revealed over the course of the film, and eventually it comes to light that Tar is a pretty toxic person and makes sexual advances on her female students, and this causes resentment between different students, and it also comes with a catch where she gives promotions to different proteges depending on whether or not they sleep with her or not. So it's sort of a Me Too film, but it's unique in a way that it's from a woman's perspective. As a woman is quote unquote being canceled, it's a kind of a more modern, refreshing take. Kate Blanchett gives a phenomenal performance. The compositions are very well crafted. There are times where there's one point perspective. There are times where each segment of the frame is filled or has a unique purpose. The film has a lot of long takes, so they let the camera sit and let the actors perform, and it creates a sort of breath of fresh air when you're watching it. It's a very artistic, very well crafted approach to filmmaking, and that's why it's pretty much in the middle of the pack. Tar has the least amount of flaws out of all the Best Picture nominees, in terms of you can't really see a glaring error in terms of filmmaking in this film. But if that's the case, then why is it not number one? Why is it in the middle of the pack? Well, there comes a point where it is a well-crafted film, but it's kind of boring. You're kind of left with Tar the entire film, and I get that's important. If Tar was slightly more interesting, then I would be more okay with that. But Tar isn't really interesting at some certain points. She does get toxic, and that does create drama, but to a point where it's like, yes, we know Tar's toxic, but what else is there in the film? Also, there's a lot of gray in the film, and that's important for the film. I understand that, but it comes at a cost where you're not really enjoying what you're seeing on screen in terms of colors. People like colors, and it's hard to have a film that's not in black and white have muted colors. It can work, and this is a film that adds to that, but there needed to be certain moments where you had some more warm light that could have added to the overall color palette of the film. Number 5 on the Best Picture ranking is The Fabelmans. This film is very warm, and it hits an emotional chord. I felt for the family and what they were going through throughout the film. I felt for Sammy Fabelman, and I felt his passion for movies. It was nice seeing the journey Sammy took between his child years to his young adult years and his filmmaker growth. And it's about infidelity, even though the film is mainly about Sammy Fabelman wanting to be a filmmaker, i.e. Steven Spielberg wanting to be a filmmaker. It's mainly about the affair Sammy's mother has. Michelle Williams stands out in this film as the best performance by far, because it is really about her. It's about her affair and how Sammy deals with that while still wanting to be a filmmaker. Sammy goes through some anti-Semitism as he gets older. So the film has a lot of heart, and it's very tragic, and it's sad. I was tearing up when I was watching the family dynamic kind of uh, rip apart, and all the characters are trying their best, try to make all the pieces fit back together again. The film ends with Sammy Fabelman meeting John Ford in his office, which is exactly what Steven Spielberg did when he was Sammy Fabelman's age. But this film has some unique problems. I was kind of left wanting a little bit more. Another thing that I will knock this film for, it does this thing that I don't like films doing, and that's referencing better movies. The fourth film on the 2023 Best Picture ranking is All Quiet on the Western Front. I think All Quiet on the Western Front is an excellent war film. This film is based off a famous novel called All Quiet on the Western Front. I don't know if you ever read it in high school. And there's also a film in the 30s that was based off that book that is also a previous Best Picture winner. This film is very, very action-packed. This film does something that the original film didn't, and that was actually have German-speaking actors in the film. In the original film, they speak English, even though they are supposed to be German characters. And in this one, they actually speak German, which was a refreshing change of pace. The trench warfare filming was akin to that of 1917, although I feel like 1917 approached it in a more magical way, and All Quiet on the Western Front approached it at a much more distant way, where the filmmaking was very cold towards the soldiers in the film, as they seemed very disposable. A lot of sharp colors in the opening shot, in the opening scene. The opening scene is probably one of the strongest parts of the film. It's very chaotic, and the choreography of the war was very well done. The film does not hold your hand in introducing the characters. They introduce the characters kind of abruptly. The film gives you some time with the characters, but it doesn't give you enough time as some other films would, where you felt like, okay, this is this character, that's what he's about. They really just go full throttle and throw you right into it, which can be a good or bad thing, and I think it ultimately works out in this film. The film also has a running thread of stealing food from this farm. It seems like they revamped the river scene with the girls in the original with that one, because the river scene is not in this film, and that was disappointing because that's my favorite part of the novel and of the original film. So that was disappointing to see that wasn't here. I also didn't mind Daniel Bruhl's storyline inclusion into the story. It needed another dynamic because it just seemed like he was just trying to convince them to end the war, and then eventually he convinces them. It seemed like there needed to be something else. I don't know. It's very, very, very well done. It's a very exciting war film. I think probably I prefer 1917 and even Dunkirk when I think of World War I or World War II war films that came out in the past few years. Only because I think those are more dynamic in terms of the approach to filmmaking. Very elaborate production design in terms of the war scenes, but I felt like the shot selection in Dunkirk and in 1917 was more sophisticated than the shot selection in All Quiet on the Western Front. It's a very well done film. It's probably going to win Best Foreign Film at the Oscars this year, and I think it's very well deserved. It's very, very masterfully well-crafted film. The third film on the 2023 Best Picture ranking is Avatar, The Way of Water. I sort of surprised myself putting Avatar, The Way of Water so high on this list. I think I am very much including the theatrical experience as part of my determining factor when ranking these films, because Avatar is unlike any other film in terms of the theater experience. The way the IMAX 3D immerses you into the world of Avatar is unlike any other thing I've ever seen in the movie theater. Not to say it's my favorite movie of all time, but in terms of the immersion factor, nothing surpasses Avatar: The Way of Water. It's truly an immersive film where you go into the water and you see the beads of the different coral and the different algae and plants in the ocean, and that kind of just gets thrown into your face, and you see the smoothness and the curves of the waves across the water come towards you in the camera, and the way the characters kind of fly through the foreground and background through the IMAX 3D. It's just so pleasant to watch. It's like eating candy. It, like, when it comes to watching a movie, you couldn't ask for anything more perfect. That's why, like, this, despite some of the flaws these films might have, I love the theater experience that these films offer, because it makes the theater worth going to. A film like this, where everything is dialed in terms of the pacing, and in terms of significant drama that occurs throughout the story. I think the drama in this film is very well earned, although reaching those earned moments, that's where the film sort of lacks, and we can talk about that in a second. But the colors in this film are great. I think the performances are also fantastic. I think Kate Winslet, I think, does a fantastic job in the film. The returning characters, Jake Sully, Zoe Saldana, gives another phenomenal performance. I think the whaling scene, although it was very intense, I thought created a lot of tension in a good way for the film. It felt very in the moment, and when I was watching the film, I felt very engrossed, and I didn't even think about anything else going on in my life. I just thought about that scene and that whale, which it's hard to achieve sometimes when you're watching a movie. Sometimes when you watch a movie, even though you're watching it, in the back of your head, you're thinking about the rest of your day or something else that's going on in your life. But there are those times where you get totally lost, and I felt like even though that whaling scene was kind of disgusting in terms of seeing that creature get hurt, it was so enthralling and so well timed that I left the world and went into that moment. And I think that's something that James Cameron should be very proud of. Some bad things about the film is the screenplay. The screenplay is really rough. The screenplay is subpar, I will have to admit. I don't like how the bad guy is just a clone of the first movie bad guy. That's really lazy and not creative in the slightest. I think the motivation for them needing to kill Jake Sully is very simplistic and contrived. I think Spider is probably the worst character out of any of the Best Pictures because of his shoehorned inclusion into the story, and how his shoehorned inclusion will ultimately have significant relevance later on in the story, unfortunately. It's tough seeing the kids get captured multiple times to the point where even the screenwriters themselves have to identify their shortcomings through the dialogue, where the characters even self-reference how the kids get captured too often, and surprisingly often, repeating the same scenes multiple times throughout the film. It's not something that should happen. The immersive theatrical experience that James Cameron offers in Avatar The Way of Water is unlike anything I've ever seen. I highly recommend seeing this movie in IMAX 3D. You won't regret it. We now move on to the Best Picture worthy tier. This tier is the films that I think would deserve the Best Picture Oscar. There are 2 films in this tier, and the second film on my Best Picture ranking for 2023 is Triangle of Sadness. Triangle of Sadness is a really refreshing film. The film is segmented into 3 parts, 3 acts, one dinner date scene, one boat act, and then one island act, where these rich people get onto a yacht, and then the yacht sinks, and then they're stranded on an island. The film is a satirical comedy that plays a commentary on materialism and elitism. The performances are really good. I really loved what Dolly D. Leon did in this film. I think she is fantastic. I enjoyed the screenplay. I enjoyed the uniqueness of the approach to a story. It's unique to start a story with one scene with no context and then branch it out into this larger commentary about social class. It's a great ensemble film as well, where you get the different people on the boat and you see all their perspectives. It's very funny and it's a very smart, sharp film in terms of the writing. The best part about the film is probably the writing, because it creates a thematic message, but it's not overt for the most part. There's one scene where Woody Harrelson and this Russian guy are talking over the intercom, and what they're doing there kind of felt like they were saying the themes of the film rather than showing us the themes of the film. Other than that, throughout the film, it was very sharp in terms of the subtext, in terms of what the characters aren't saying. I think that's really hard to do in the film, but this film does it masterfully, and it still works into one cohesive story. It all threads together in an organic way that makes sense. The number 1 film that Lawless Films will rank in the 2023 Best Picture ranking is Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. This film surprised me probably more than any of the other films. It's a multiverse film. It takes place over multiple universes because this one universe leaked into alternate universes. But in the heart of the film, it's about a woman who's struggling with her marriage and who owns a laundromat. This story takes a simple concept and expands it into a multi-universe epic. It's probably the most unique film I've seen in a long time. This film is about what it means to be human and what it means to have people you care about and what it means to make mistakes. Michelle Yeoh's character is a mom who's not perfect and is not as kind as she could be to her husband and to her daughter. And that gets blown out to proportion when a different version of her husband comes to find her to say that her daughter in a different universe has gone insane, killing other universes because of Michelle Yeoh's character's coldness towards her. The film is about Michelle Yeoh's character learning how to become basically a good mother. In order to do that, she has to become a superhero that travels multiple universes. And that's a really crazy film to even think about. Who would have thought a film like that would even remotely work? And the film, what it does the best is juggles multiple different genres simultaneously. It's a comedy, at the same time it's a drama, at the same time it's a mystery, at the same time it's an action film. The performances are probably the best performances in all the Best Picture nominees. Michelle Yeoh knocks out of the park. Ke Kwang, fantastic, probably his best performance he's ever given. Stephanie Hsu, a breakout performance. She really kills it. Jamie Lee Curtis is good in the film. Jamie Lee Curtis probably has the least strong performance out of all of the characters, but she still gives a pretty decent performance. I think Daniels do a fantastic job directing, and the editing in this film tells a story in and of itself, because the way the editing jumps between different universes and how each universe could have its own editing style in terms of how each universe deals with pacing is like so cool, because it's like you're getting a different filmmaking style and perspective and taste in each universe. One thing I have to knock the film for, there is one universe where Michelle Yeoh is a famous actress and she's talking to Keiki Kwang outside on the street, and it's a clear homage to Wong Kar-wai's film In the Mood for Love. And again, it's one of those things where you're referencing a better movie. I think In the Mood for Love is still a better movie than Everything Everywhere All at Once. So when you reference In the Mood for Love, I'm thinking In the Mood for Love. I'd rather watch that movie. But that's not to say Everything Everywhere All at Once is a bad movie. I just don't like when movies try to pull good things from better movies and try to repackage it. It's something that I'm personally not a fan of. But they did this one in a tasteful way where they didn't actually show you that movie, but they referenced the filmmaking style, which I can appreciate as a like a filmmaking fan and a filmmaker. I can appreciate that appreciation towards Wong Kar-wai. I really hope Everything Everywhere All at Once wins the Best Picture Oscar. I think it is between that film and The Banshees of Inisherin. But as you can see, Banshees of Inisherin is significantly lower on my ranking than Everything Everywhere All at Once. So it would be really important for me that Everything Everywhere wins Best Picture, because that would just mean the world to me. I think Everything Everywhere winning Best Picture would make the film the best Picture of the 2020s. I think it would be a better Best Picture than Coda, and I think it would be a better Best Picture than Nomadland. So I'm really looking forward to the Oscars, and I really hope Everything Everywhere All at Once wins Best Picture. But let me know what you think should win Best Picture in the comments down below. And do me one more favor and like this video if you haven't already, and subscribe to the channel so you stay up to date on all new upcoming content. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.